welcome to the AI in Action podcast series, Ben.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, can you start us off today by telling us what scares you the most about AI?
I think what scares a lot of people, I think I share a lot of those concerns, but I have some specific ones as well. The biggest one, of course, is cognitive offloading, the reduction in general knowledge. I think I have some broader fears about illiteracy that may or may not be scientifically founded. And then I have some very specific concerns about the quality of our research, particularly qualitative research going forward. And I can talk about some of that specifically. One of the challenges we have, though, with expressing our concerns is the lack of longitudinal scientific research on the problem because it's only been around for a few years in its current form. And so whenever we're talking about the dangers, we're always projecting and opining more than we are referencing really solid scientific work. I'm already dragging you in, but there's this great study by MIT that has been widely cited and referenced that showed through some neurological testing that AI does reduce not just cognitive load, but the kind of depth of thinking,
Mhm.
the depth of cognitive engagement that people suffer when they use AI. And there are a whole bunch of other takes on it that I think are probably, my opinion is that they're accurate.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think folks they're not aware that okay, if I delegate my thinking here to this program, how it impacts them, and I really appreciate you emphasizing that about like cognitive offloading and kind of how it impacts your depth of really your ability to think.
Your ability to think, certainly as adults and as children. I mean, there's a great piece in Psychology Today about the impact. And again, it's the scientific research is thin, but the impact that this is going to have on children. And the author used the term foreclosure, and that adults that have already developed the skills and have resident knowledge have the mental models to think things through in a really thoughtful way, that can maybe they could use AI and not suffer from it too much. Children don't have that luxury because they haven't created those mental models. They don't have the depth of knowledge that it requires to check whether or not an AI is accurate or to recognize when they're offloading too much. And so this author's opinion was that children will just choose to foreclose. They'll never learn about something that's overly complex or challenging because they don't have to. And there's nothing leading them or pushing them or pulling them in that direction when the answer is right at your fingertips. I know some people will say, well, that's been true with search engines. There is a substantive difference there. I'd be more than happy to talk about that. But the MIT study and another study look at the differences. They had three separate groups. They had a group that was just using ChatGPT. They had a group that was using search engines and a group that was not using either of those. And the search engine group fell somewhere in the middle in terms of cognitive load. So all those things are relevant, and it kind of feeds into something that it's a cruddy term. I don't have a better word for it, but monogenerational expertise. And I had a professor emeritus from Princeton push back on me on this one, and he said, "Well, all expertise is monogenerational." I said, "Yes, to a certain extent, but we also pass things down. We pass down traditions of learning. There are norms for learning and research and knowledge building that are not monogenerational. They are cross generational." And we are right now, I think, at risk of damaging and perhaps abandoning a lot of those cross-generational norms for learning. And that worries me quite a bit. And it feeds, I think, a real weird misperception that is kind of contributed to by the AI companies, that there is this paragon user that will know precisely and if when and how much to use AI, not to use it too much, never use it to write the whole thing. You're writing with AI, not having AI write for you, as if AI were a human. And there's this kind of magical, perfect balance that the Paragon user would apply in perpetuity. They never get lazy. They never lose any cognitive capacity. They're always benefiting from the AI relationship. I think that's just fantasy. And just like there's no longitudinal study to back up the criticisms, there's no longitudinal study to back up the idea of this paragon user. And I think the greater risk, there's a more likelihood, this is an opinion, that we're going to have in the future monogenerational expertise more than paragon users. Um,
Mm.
and last thing before I let you ask another question, uh, sorry for rambling, is that we're also losing expertise in our older folks as well. I had a really interesting conversation with some students at Georgetown University, where I teach as an adjunct, and these were younger people that relative to me. They were in their late 20s, and they're all working students, so they learn at night. And two women said that they work with Gen Xers, my generation, and that the Gen Xers are the worst violators. They're the ones that will just offload everything to Claude or ChatGPT, not even bother to hide the fact that there's a prompt embedded in their work. And so it's not like, oh, those young kids are going to be damaged by this or they're abusing it. It's hitting all of us perhaps in different ways at the same time.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think AI was kind of lauded as this magic wand of efficiency and increasing, accuracy and it's okay to drink the Kool-Aid here and offload what you want, but the impacts are quite broad and we don't even know the depth of those impacts. Are these like long-term cognitive effects? Is this just like, when we were kids and we would just sit and like veg out on MTV, all day long on Saturdays? Like, is it just like that and you remove the TV and we can go back to functioning? Or how is this impacting people? I think is just not, we won't know until it's quite widespread.
So the word efficiency is the sales pitch word, and that's the term that the AI companies use to push this forward to a significant extent. There are other terms as well, but efficiency is the one that seems to resonate. And when I have conversations with experts my age, very serious senior career professionals, mid career professionals, the thing that they say about AI is that it allows them to offload tasks or speed things up, accelerate the work that they do. And their thinking is, look, I'm already good at this thing. Either two things, right? I'm either really good at this thing already, and it's just making me faster at doing things I'm really good at. So what's the point of spending all this time formatting a footnote or organizing data in a table? I mean, that's just a waste of in their terms. That's a waste of time, and I can do these other things faster. And then there are the very kind of mundane tasks, like, oh, paying my bills. There are people that have AI paying their bills. I don't think I would feel comfortable doing that, but there are people that are better with these things than I am that do those things. And they're like, look, I now get three times as much done, but I tend to talk and engage with people who are operating at a very high level of efficiency already. And these are people who are adept at taking advantage of new technologies in ways that the vast majority of people are not. And the head of NVIDIA, actually, I believe it was the head of NVIDIA, said, I think it was a couple months ago, 90% of people are using AI wrong. And my reaction to that was, yeah. And 90% of people will continue to use AI wrong in your terms. But you're also creating a value proposition that many of us don't necessarily agree with. I don't think it's necessarily better to be efficient in all tasks. There are some tasks where inefficiency is built into the process. Learning is one of those. And so, a huge impact is taking place across universities, at high schools, even below that, where AI students have immediately, a large number of students have immediately offloaded their cognitive processes to to LLMs in particular. Teachers do it. We had an experience recently where a teacher of one of our students was clearly using AI to provide feedback. That's not helpful, and that really it can sour the relationship that we have with each other. It's a breach of trust to a significant extent. And being efficient in learning and being efficient in teaching, I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that efficiency can be a negative input to the process. You should be struggling. And I'll look, I mean, this is me personally. Look, obviously, I'm not a fan. So when I teach, I have no AI classes. I have no electronics classes, in fact. And I have found that the students that do desire to take those classes, there are fewer of them, tend to be really engaged and love having kind of face-to-face conversations and building interpersonal relationships around learning. They want to sink themselves into this thing. And so immense harm, I think, is being created in our educational process in our institutions.
So Ben, what are you hopeful about with AI?
Clearly not much. Look, I mean, I, I am a qualitative research leader, and so and a professor of things that are very qualitative, not quantitative. So for me, that's my perspective. My view on the world is through that lens. I'm well aware, although from a distance, of all the tremendous progress being made in hard science, in medical advances, in computational science. Um, Debatable, but I know some mathematicians will not be happy to hear this, but in mathematics, certainly in engineering and design, there are all sorts of ways that AI can, of course, make things better. I would argue you probably still have to worry about cognitive offloading and the loss of expertise over time. But let's assume that there are some hard science benefits to AI. I still haven't seen where that helps us on the more human side of things. And so I would restrict it tightly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head talking about kind of the human side of things. Even this morning, I spent this morning up at getting a medical test run, and it blew my mind, Ben. Like, not once did a single one of the nurses or the technicians look me in the eyes. They spent the entire time looking at a screen. Like, they'll do things, an hour of looking at a screen. Doctor comes in, doesn't even like, no greeting, no nothing, just straight to the screen. And this is so different than, 10 years ago when you had these medical providers who would talk to you, explain the scary stuff to you, answer your questions, like take a moment. And I thought it was interesting because everything I've been reading and everything I've been hearing is like, kind of what you're talking about is, oh, the amount of advances we're going to have in medicine, modern medicine, with the ability to mine this data and, come up with new, treatment protocols. And that may be true, but I don't know, the patient experience is horrific now. So go figure that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of us have had that experience. And it's not just, I think what's important about what you just said is that it's not just about the AI, it's about the digitization of our lives in general. Right? And AI has just kind of dramatically accelerated that in ways that I think are forcing people to realize that, hey, maybe this is not all great. But digitization in and of itself has had a lot of harm, caused a lot of harm that I think people are somewhat aware of, like you just described, and then that people are less aware of. So what you just described is this breakdown in kind of human to human relationships caused by the interference of digital electronic media, right? That because we believe that the digitization process makes things more efficient, like AI, that it's therefore a good unto itself. And we've shifted the value proposition of a lot of our lives, right? That the purpose of medicine is to help the person, you, in that appointment. The purpose of medicine is not to make the transition of data between the doctor and the hospital and the file system more efficient. And we seem to have lost that thread, right? And I think a lot of that came with offloading government processes to contractors and businesses that earn money from those things and that view the world through the lens of efficiency. And we do not. Government is inherently inefficient for a lot of good reasons. So let me tell you a quick story about how this has impacted the U.S. military, and it's something that I care about deeply is military history. Knowing what happened in the past helps us understand it, and then obviously improve the way we think. build our cognitive models, and then hopefully do better in the future. In the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, we started to digitize a lot of, it really started in the 70s, but we really accelerated in the late 80s, early 90s, digitizing a lot of the things the military was doing. And we used to have in every military unit, down to the lowest level. So you'd have a military unit of about 150 people, and they would have a clerk. And the clerk's sole job was to type up all the paperwork, take a copy of the paperwork, file it somewhere, and it would exist, as long as the piece of paper was alive, it would exist somewhere. And a copy would go to somebody else. And they would record just about everything that happened. Well, digitization allowed for us to consolidate a lot of our administrative functions and our record keeping functions. And so they created consolidated administrative centers. They got rid of the clerks. And so now the people were removed from the process at the lowest levels, and everything went into digital files. The problem with digital files is that they're easy to lose, easier to lose than paper, believe it or not, easy to corrupt, easy to delete. And in some cases, they're deleted because people don't want the things in those files to be seen. In some cases, they're deleted by accident, and digits corrode as well over time, depending on how they're stored. And what I found in a research project I did for the RAND Corporation, I won't say where it was, but it was in a major combatant command. I just wanted to know where U.S. military forces had been over about a 2 decade period in this region. And the command historian said, I don't know. Because I don't know, because we've digitized everything, and it's impossible to track it now because of all these different systems that don't communicate with one another and the failure to code the data the right way. AI is not going to accelerate that. It's not going to make it better. In fact, it has a real possibility of compounding a lot of the errors we've already created by getting rid of the kind of more traditional ways of recording knowledge and learning. That also feeds into a discussion about why we have knowledge and what we do with it, but I'll hold that.
So I know you kind of touched on this a little bit already, but how do you think AI is changing, our society, or, learning kind of how we function as humans, how we interact with the world?
I mean, I think I've hit on that a lot already.
Mhm.
I just would drive home the point that it is accelerating our disconnectedness, and that we're already suffering from disconnection because of digitization, because of social media. Right, this counterintuitive idea that this technology that was created to bring us closer together has in odd ways driven us further apart. And I think it's harmed us significantly. We're at the cusp of the AI revolution now. I don't know where it's going to take us. I think it has the propensity to harm us further. However, I will say this: I am seeing and hearing a lot more pushback from people of all ages, and particularly young people, which gives me a lot of hope. And high school students, I have two high school students, their peers, college students that we know that are part of the family. They don't want it. They don't want to learn with AI. They don't want to they want what I had, what you had, which was the opportunity to develop knowledge and to suffer and struggle through the necessarily difficult process of learning to become smarter and better and more knowledgeable and frankly more effective humans, not to cheat, which is the way a lot of them see it. And frankly, look, not everybody's using AI to cheat. That would be unfair, but a lot of people are, and that's something that a lot of people also on the other side reject. And seeing that rejection that comes hand in hand with kind of a rejection of the data centers and the technology that comes with AI gives me hope that it's not going to be completely corrosive.
So how do you think AI has the potential to impact, democracy?
I think we're already seeing this was predicted when ChatGPT
Mhm.
first started putting images and video out. And there's a great piece in the New York Times about an analyst who has spent his whole career looking for fakes in video and photos. And he's now just completely overwhelmed by AI, and no longer trusts even his own expert judgment about what is and is not real. I think there were predictions that this was going to be immediately calamitous, and I think those have been overblown to some extent. What has happened, I think, is immediately people are more skeptical of everything. Now that's both positive and negative. And it's positive in that people are not, maybe are not going to be inclined to be as gullible or taken in by um, things that are misleading or framed inaccurately or by fake AI fakes. However, that also means that people are going to be disbelieving of a lot of facts. Um, and I've lived and worked in societies where people don't believe anything they see or hear because the governments that represent them don't actually represent them. They just manipulate them. And I've lived in countries in the Middle East where people just are, they reject knowledge because to them, knowledge is what is fed to them by the government, and they know most of it is false in dictatorships. Um, I hope we're not heading in that direction where we reject all knowledge out of hand. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to continue to build as much reliable knowledge as possible so that doesn't happen, or if it does happen, that there's something we can all fall back on.
So what safeguards, do you think should be in place regarding AI? I feel like there's kind of like two extreme camps. Everyone wants to turn it off or they want to like let it run wild.
Yeah. Well, I think the cat's out of the bag, unfortunately, with most of this. I mean, we're seeing this with Anthropic's, Fable, where they had a kind of a dumbed down version of their far more potentially dangerous AI that's now restricted. They tried to restrict Fable access. Somebody immediately hacked it.
Mhm.
I think once it's out in the open, it's out in the open, and you just have to accept that fact. We can't stop the Chinese from doing things.
Mhm.
So no matter what restrictions we put on AI, in the United States, I think we're in trouble, and we're gonna have to deal with the consequences. I'm not a technology expert. I'm not an AI expert. I can't tell you the technological threats, ins, outs, possibilities for curtailment. But I can say that we have to find a way to safeguard as much of our data as possible, and frankly, to take a lot of it offline. And I know that's counterintuitive, but if we don't start creating offline reserves of things that really matter to us, we risk losing them because they are extremely vulnerable. And I can tell you from my own research that digital decay is a real thing, that a lot of knowledge we think exists because we're inundated with information all day long is deteriorating at a rate faster than you could possibly imagine. Give you an example. I built a database of 423 battle cases. We're going back and updating modern ones. We're going back and updating that now. I've got over 1,000 prospective cases. And I've been going back through some of the older ones, and all the links and files and everything are still connected, and half of them are, or at least half of them are dead. They no longer exist, and that knowledge no longer exists. There are authors of published articles, and their published articles no longer exist because the online magazine is gone, and they never printed anything. So that's something to think about, how we preserve knowledge.
Yeah, I really appreciate you emphasizing that. I think that is not on many people's radar.
Nor should it be, right? I mean, there should be people like us talking about this, people in government that are really putting a lot of thought and effort into this, and I fear that that's just not the case, certainly in the United States.
Yeah, well, just as you're talking, it reminds me so much about how much important knowledge, the stuff you really need to know in those tough moments is, passed down from folks who had experiences and, kind of shared that wisdom with you. It's not found with a chat bot trying to, navigate because life is much more complex and nuanced than what kind of I think the binary world presents.
What is the joy in
Mhm.
life if everything is a Bayesian satisficed answer? How miserable. And I know that there are people who are already miserable and lonely and alone,
Mhm.
and AI is their only possibility for companionship. That's a very small percentage of the population. The vast majority of us, and there's plenty of scientific evidence to back this up, we need human connection. We need to share knowledge with each other. And one of the things, the conversations that I have with colleagues who use AI frequently and defend its use, and they describe LLM's use as working with LLMs as if they're a partner. My counter argument to them is no, you're robbing your colleagues of an engagement every time you refer to an LLM. So you're asking this really just a statistical inference machine, right? How to think about a certain problem, and it may do a pretty good job of it. But what would you have done if the LLM weren't there? You would have called me. You would have called one of our other
Mhm.
colleagues. We would have had an interesting debate. You would have triggered an idea in my mind. I would have we would have reconnected a little bit or strengthened our
Mhm.
connection. I would have learned something that you were doing, and you would have learned something that I was doing, and that's how we typically shared knowledge up until about 2 or 3 years ago. We still have those conversations, but they're weaker than they were in the past, and I fear that we're going to lose them increasingly again with that monogenerational approach to behavior, not just knowledge, but also human behavior.
So what do you think, an AI empowered future is going to look like for Americans?
I mean, I think it's going to be at least temporarily ugly. And I fear that we are going to have a split society that takes us backwards. And we're going to have people like me and others who really value traditional education, knowledge, and learning that are going, and by the way, people who can afford to pay for elite institutions, like elite colleges, they're going to be um, a small segment of society, and a larger segment of society will be less literate, less knowledgeable, less capable of discerning right from wrong, true from false. And I mean, there's learning is hard, reading is hard, writing is particularly difficult and stressful for a lot of people, most people. And if they don't need to do it, they probably won't. The vast majority of people, even PhDs,
Mhm.
that's true, right? As I just said. So um, we risk moving into a place where the need to go to a university, the belief in our collegiate system, which is already under attack, gets worse and fades, and a lot of institutions close. And the more institutions that close, the fewer people go to college, the less education there is across the United States, the smaller our segment of society becomes, and that can be particularly unhealthy. We don't need more division.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me because, I remember when the internet became kind of commercially available for us regular people. And when I remember seeing like the first personal computer at our public library, and it was such an event. It was like, wow, we now have information access and connections to people, who live in other states, other side of the world. And it was just supposed to be this like wealth of information and the ability to connect. And you fast forward a few decades, and it is very much the effects that you've described. What was intended to connect us has disconnected us in so many ways. And then it's interesting with AI and kind of hearing your insights as to how it's impacting even kind of information, like what we know and how we apply it. And I think it's just stuff people are not tracking on.
Yeah, and what is life going to become if AI is fully successful? So let's take the vision propagated by all these various companies, Altman and uh,
Mhm.
I won't go the list of people, right? You
Mhm.
know them all. Let's assume that they're right and that it's all wonderful and all of our tasks are offloaded. They all acknowledge that a lot of people are going to be out of work and have to retrain or whatever they're going to have to do. That's not the first time anybody's envisioned that. And I'm glad you mentioned the personal computer. There's a terrific news story in the ITN archive. So ITN is a British news company. They've just opened up their archives on YouTube, and there's some terrific long form reporting from the 70s and 80s in particular. And there's a story there about the impact that computers in general are going to have on people's lives. And there was a lot of worry and concern about job loss. And then they had a futurist there, and the reporter asked the futurist, "Well, what will people do when the computers take over all of our jobs?" And he said, well, this is about 50 years from now. This was in the early 80s, so we're not too far off, right?
Mhm.
He said, well, people spend about 10 to 15 hours a day, I'm paraphrasing here, taking care of the computers. And then the reporter said, well, what would they do with the rest of their time? And he said, well, they'll take care of each other, I suppose,
Oh, wow.
which was remarkably optimistic about humanity. It presupposes we have no desire for value or meaning in our lives. I mean, that is just completely anathema to the way that humanity actually works, right? So we want to live purposeful lives. We want to
Mhm.
have a reason to live. We want to have something to hand down to our children, to teach people about, to share with other people, to be proud of. And the idea that you would spend 10 to 15 hours a week just working on a computer, which a lot of people love doing, but not even getting any satisfaction out of that because it's just a part-time gig. And then I guess just sit around. I mean, there's the fear. It's always dangerous to reference movies, right? But there's the fear that we all become the fat people riding around in the Wall-E carts. If it's a cartoon, right, where everybody is the beneficiaries of computers to the point that they never have to do anything and they can't even stand up and they just have little autonomous vehicles driving them around with screens in front of their faces. I think that's ridiculous. That's probably a bridge too far. But that kind of bizarre forecast is similar to the ones that we're hearing today.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for sharing your insights on the AI in Action series. It's very enlightening, and it's always a joy to talk with you.
Thanks for having me on.